The sun filtered through the trees in soft golden streaks as Emily's laughter bounced along the quiet trail. It was the kind of crisp autumn day that seemed made for adventure. She was only 6, full of boundless energy and endless curiosity. Her parents, Mark and Julia, walked just a few steps behind, their backpacks bouncing as they chatted about dinner plans and the scenic view ahead. Emily darted forward, chasing a monarch butterfly that danced just out of reach. Her mother called out, "Stay close, sweetheart." But Emily was already around the next bend, giggling as the butterfly floated higher. It all happened in a blink. By the time her parents turned the corner, she was gone. "Emily?" Mark called out, his voice still calm. No answer. Julia hurried forward, her heart starting to quicken. They scanned the forest, thinking maybe she'd stepped behind a tree or squatted down to look at a flower. But there was no sign of her. The minutes ticked by. Calm turned into confusion. Confusion gave way to rising panic. They split up, calling her name louder with each step, voices echoing through the pines. There was no response. Only the whisper of wind and the distant rustle of animals moving through the brush. The cheerful energy of the hike had disappeared, replaced by a terrible stillness. Julia dropped her backpack, pulled out her phone. No signal. Mark shouted louder, voice cracking, "Emily! Emily!" But the forest stayed silent. Somewhere deep in the woods, Emily had taken one wrong step. Just one. She'd followed the butterfly through a thicket of low branches and climbed over a mossy log. When she realized the butterfly had disappeared and she could no longer hear her parents, her smile faded. She spun in place, confused. Every direction looked the same. And then she saw it. A clearing, a flash of sunlight, maybe a way back. But as she ran toward it, the ground gave way beneath her foot. Her shoe slipped on wet leaves. She tumbled forward and rolled, dirt and leaves flying, until her small body came to a jarring stop on a ledge barely wider than a kitchen shelf. Emily froze. She was halfway down a cliff, too scared to scream, too shocked to cry. Gripping a twisted root with both hands, she peered up at the trees above, eyes wide, lip trembling. She was alone, clinging to the edge of the world. And nobody knew where she was. Yet, something was already watching from the shadows. The night crept in slowly, shrouding the wilderness in a blanket of cold. Emily's fingers ached from gripping the root, her arms trembling from exhaustion. The darkness around her seemed to stretch on forever, every rustle of leaves and distant snap of branches making her heart race. She wanted to cry out, but her voice was a tiny whisper, swallowed by the vastness of the forest. The ledge she clung to was barely wide enough to sit on, much less stand. It was a jagged, rocky shelf that dropped down sharply, disappearing into the darkness below. Emily shuddered, her small body aching from the awkward position she had found herself in. Every time she shifted, the rocks beneath her seemed to shift, too, threatening to send her falling into the unknown. She tried to remember the way she'd come. Hadn't she seen a trail of sunlight just moments before the ground had betrayed her? She glanced up toward the sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of something familiar. But the towering cliffs and thick canopy of trees blocked out most of the stars. The forest was immense, and she was a tiny speck in its depths. Her mind raced. How long had it been since she'd last seen her parents? She thought of their faces, her mom's worried expression, her dad's calm but strained voice as he called her name. Had they found the trail yet? Were they looking for her? The cold bite of the wind chilled her, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She shivered uncontrollably, her body too small to handle the mountain's evening chill. The root she held onto seemed to grow slicker with each passing minute, and her grip was starting to slip. She didn't know how long she could hold on. A strange thought crossed her mind. What if no one found her? What if she stayed here alone forever? Her chest tightened at the thought, and a small sob escaped her lips. She bit her lip to hold back the tears, refusing to give in to fear. But then, in the distance, something shifted. A movement, A rustle in the underbrush. It was faint, but Emily could feel it. A presence. Something. Or someone was out there. And then, from the shadows, she saw them. Eyes. Glowing, watching. A figure stepped closer. The eyes glowed in the dim light, catching Emily's attention with a sudden intensity. At first, she thought they might be a trick of the fading light, perhaps a reflection from a distant animal, or even the moonlight playing through the trees. But then the eyes blinked. They weren't far off, moving with an eerie grace through the underbrush. Slowly, a figure stepped forward, its shape materializing out of the darkness. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow. The figure was large, nearly the size of a small pony, its body covered in thick gray fur. Its movements were fluid, deliberate, and calm. It was a wolf. For a moment, Emily froze, too terrified to even breathe. She had heard stories about wolves from her parents, how they lived in packs, how they could be dangerous if provoked. She had never seen one up close, and the thought of it made her heart race. But the wolf didn't come closer. Instead, it stood still, watching her with its intelligent, amber eyes. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the creature's gaze locked with hers. For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, and the only thing that mattered was the quiet, unspoken connection between them. Then, without warning, the wolf tilted its head, as if considering her situation. It let out a soft whine, low and almost sorrowful, before turning away. Emily blinked in confusion as the wolf's body melted back into the shadows, leaving her in a daze. She didn't know what to make of it. Was it dangerous, or had it just cared? But then, as if to answer her unspoken question, the wolf returned, this time not alone. One by one, other wolves emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing in the dim light. They circled the base of the cliff, moving in slow, cautious steps, as if carefully evaluating the girl. The alpha wolf, the largest of them all, moved to the front. Its fur was silver gray, nearly shimmering in the moonlight. She could feel the weight of its gaze, both powerful and gentle at once. It lowered its head slightly, studying Emily, then stepped toward her. Emily's heart fluttered. The wolves weren't approaching in a threatening way. They didn't growl. They didn't show their teeth. They seemed curious, almost protective. She could hardly believe it, but in that moment, she didn't feel scared. Not anymore. The moonlight filtered through the canopy above, casting a silvery glow across the wolves as they surrounded the base of the cliff. Emily, still clinging to the root, could hardly believe what she was seeing. The wolves, these wild creatures of the forest, weren't coming to attack. They weren't threatening her. They were simply there, watching her with those glowing amber eyes, their bodies low to the ground, poised but not aggressive. The silver-gray alpha stepped forward again, its fur shimmering under the moonlight. It paused for a moment, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Then it settled down onto the forest floor with a soft thud. The other wolves followed suit, one by one, lowering their bodies onto the ground, forming a loose circle around the cliff. They weren't looking at each other. Their eyes remained fixed on Emily. The cold of the night seemed to settle deeper around her, but in the presence of these creatures, she felt an unexpected sense of warmth. The wind rustled the leaves high above, but down here, there was a strange stillness. The wolves didn't move, didn't bark, didn't growl. They simply watched. Emily's grip on the root loosened as her body began to relax, though she remained cautious. The scent of the forest filled her senses, the earthy smell of pine and moss, the fresh bite of mountain air, and beneath it all, there was something comforting about the quiet presence of the wolves. They weren't predators, at least not right now. They were something else. Guardians, perhaps. She shivered from the cold, and the silver-gray wolf's eyes seemed to narrow slightly, as if it noticed her discomfort. It didn't move, but its presence was there, a silent reassurance that she wasn't entirely alone. There was something deeply primal, in the way the pack remained still, their attention unwavering. They weren't hungry. They weren't curious in the way other animals might be. They were simply there. Hours passed, and the night deepened. Emily's body ached with the cold, but she didn't dare move. The wolves stayed at the base of the cliff, unmoving. It was as if they knew that they were the only ones who could offer her protection in this vast wilderness. She thought of her parents, of how far away they must be. But here, in this strange moment, she didn't feel so alone. The wind howled once more, but it was different now. It felt softer. As the hours stretched on, the moon began to wane, and the forest remained eerily quiet. The pack of wolves had not moved, and neither had Emily. She was too tired to think clearly anymore. The cold had crept deep into her bones, but there was something about the wolves' watchful presence that kept her calm, a strange comfort in the midst of the terrifying unknown. The only sound that filled the air was the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional distant call of an owl. Emily's eyes fluttered closed for a moment, too exhausted to stay awake, but a sudden sharp howl pierced the stillness, causing her heart to race. The wolf that had been closest to the cliff edge, its silver-gray fur glowing in the dim light, lifted its head high. The howl was long, deep, and haunting, a call that echoed across the valley. It was unlike anything Emily had ever heard, both mournful and commanding, and it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The wolves did not flinch. They had heard it before. But Emily, still clinging to the cliff, felt something stir deep within her. There was a purpose in that howl, something urgent and primal. She strained her ears, listening as the sound reverberated through the trees. It wasn't a call to rally the pack for hunting. No, this was something else. The wolves raised their heads now, and one by one, they turned their gaze toward the distant hills, where the howl had traveled. Emily could feel their attention shift. The forest seemed to hold its breath as they waited, the stillness so thick it was almost tangible. Another howl followed, fainter but still strong. It was different from the first, but just as unmistakable. And then a third. It was a call for help. Emily's mind raced as the wolves began to stir. They weren't moving with the same calm, patient rhythm they had earlier. There was something more frantic now in their movements. They stood as one, their heads raised high, eyes scanning the horizon. The pack was on alert. And then, as if by some unspoken command, they began to move. The silver-gray alpha looked up at the cliff where Emily still clung, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked once again. Then, the pack turned and disappeared into the woods, vanishing into the night. Emily blinked in confusion. She had no idea what was happening, but she felt something beyond words, that made her believe help was coming. As the wolves vanished into the trees, Emily's mind raced. She remained frozen, still clinging to the cliffside. But now, in the silence that followed, there was a strange sense of anticipation in the air. The wolves had left, but their call, their urgent howls, still echoed in her ears. What had just happened? Were they calling for help? Were they leading someone to her? The thoughts tumbled through her mind, faster than she could make sense of them. She didn't have long to wonder. Moments later, a sound pierced the night, a voice, distant but clear, calling out her name. Emily. Emily. The voice was faint, but unmistakable. Her heart leaped in her chest. Mom. Dad? She barely recognized the sound of her own voice as she called back, her throat dry. The wind caught the words, scattering them into the dark expanse of the forest. But there it was again, louder this time, coming from the direction of the trail. Emily, we're coming. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was her father's voice. He was so close. He was coming for her. And then, another sound, this one more distant, but growing louder with every second, crashed into the silence. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, and not just one pair. There were more, many more. The pounding of boots, the sharp sound of someone navigating the rocky terrain. And then she heard it, a long, powerful howl. It was a familiar sound, the same one she had heard earlier, the wolves. The realization hit her like a jolt of electricity. They hadn't just howled for help. They had led the way. Emily's pulse quickened as she peered over the edge of the cliff, her heart pounding in her chest. Below, she could see the faint glow of flashlights bouncing off the dark trees. The searchers were closing in. But what did the wolves know? How could they have known she needed help? Her breath came in sharp gasps as the sound of the footsteps drew closer. She couldn't see them yet, but the search team was almost here. Her body shook, exhaustion threatening to take over. She had never been more relieved in her life to hear human voices again. A figure appeared at the edge of the trees. A man, holding a rope, his eyes scanning the cliffside. It was one of the rescuers, and just behind him, the pack of wolves reappeared, emerging silently from the woods, as if they had never left. The rescuers were here. Help had arrived. But the wolves, they had done something remarkable. They had led the way. The rescuers moved swiftly, lowering ropes down to Emily's position. She could hardly believe her eyes. After hours of terror and uncertainty, help had finally arrived. Her father's voice called out to her, panic laced with relief. "Emily, we're right here, baby. Hang on." With a mixture of exhaustion and newfound hope, Emily let go of the root, her fingers aching from the tight grip she had maintained for so long. The rescuers shouted words of encouragement as they lowered the ropes, and Emily, shaky but determined, began to climb toward safety. The cold wind whipped at her face as she made her way up the cliffside, the climb slower than she wanted. Each movement felt like it took a lifetime. But the sound of her father's voice, so close now, pushed her forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily's small hands grasped the edge of the cliff, and she was pulled to safety. The rush of warmth that enveloped her was overwhelming, and she gasped, feeling a wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Her father embraced her tightly, his arms shaking with relief. "Emily, you're safe, you're safe. We found you. Thank God." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clung to him, finally allowing herself to sob. But then, through her tears, she whispered something that left everyone in stunned silence. "The big doggies stayed with me all night." Her voice was soft, almost as if she wasn't sure they'd believe her. But the rescuers and her parents froze, exchanging looks of disbelief. It took a moment for them to process what she had said. "The wolves," Julia whispered, her eyes wide. "The wolves were with you." Emily nodded, her face serious as she wiped away a tear. "They were nice. They didn't hurt me. They kept me company." The rescuers, who had been trained for all kinds of wilderness situations, were speechless. They had never heard of such a thing. Wolves were typically wary of humans, not protective of them. And yet, here was Emily, a little girl, saved by a pack of wolves who had silently watched over her the entire night. As the team helped her into a thermal blanket, Emily's eyes drifted to the edge of the forest. The wolves, who had silently remained in the background, were gone. But Emily would never forget them. They had stayed with her when no one else could, and in her heart, they were her guardians. As the rescuers led Emily back toward the base camp, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by her relieved parents, a quiet peace settled over the forest. The wolves, having completed their silent vigil, had disappeared back into the woods as mysteriously as they had arrived. Not a single one was in sight, and the only sound now was the rustling of the wind in the trees. Emily glanced over her shoulder, her small hand clutching her father's. But the wolves were gone. She looked up at her parents, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the rescue, but with a sense of calm she hadn't felt before. The weight of the night's events was still sinking in, but it felt like a distant memory. All that mattered now was that she was safe. The team of rescuers had gathered around the fire, talking among themselves in hushed voices. They had never encountered a situation like this before. There had been no signs of aggression from the wolves, only calm and patient protection. It was as if the creatures had known exactly what to do, guiding them to the girl's location and staying by her side through the cold hours of the night. Emily's mother, Julia, looked at her daughter with disbelief. "The wolves, they'd really stayed with you?" she asked, her voice soft with awe. Emily nodded, a serious expression on her face. "They were nice. They didn't want me to be scared." Her words were simple, but they carried a truth that none of the adults around her could deny. The story of the wolves' unusual protection spread quickly. In the following days, wildlife experts were called in to investigate the area, trying to understand the behavior of the pack. They confirmed that the wolves in the area were part of a known pack, but none could explain why they had stayed with Emily, especially given that they had never exhibited such behavior with humans before. The pack's actions would remain a mystery to many, but one thing was certain: the wolves had played a pivotal role in Emily's survival. They had given her something no human could have, a quiet, unwavering presence that helped her stay calm in the face of fear and uncertainty. In the end, the wolves faded back into the wild, their story becoming a legend whispered among locals and wildlife enthusiasts. For Emily, however, the wolves would always be a part of her story, silent guardians who had appeared out of nowhere when she needed them most, leaving her with a sense of awe and gratitude that would never fade. And as she grew older, she would tell the story of the night the wolves saved her, a story that would warm hearts and remind people that sometimes the wild can be kinder than we ever imagined.